Hello friends, this is your friend back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto got a harem with Hana, Anko, and Shino? If you like this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. Naruto sighed as he looked at himself in the steamy mirror of his bathroom. His eyes trailing the marks that ran across his cheeks were something that made him stand out from the crowd. From a distance, they were hardly noticeable, easily mistaken as dirt or face paint. Up close however allowed the whisker markings to be shown for what they were, physical marks. The Hokage once told him that he was born with them, making them as birthmarks in an odd sort of way. The way his skin was indented slightly, showed up close that the marks were permanent physical features of his face. Trailing his finger across them now he could feel the hair that had grown in since the last time he had shaven them. He'd noticed the increased growth of hair since his 11th birthday. It wasn't just his face that was becoming hairier, but it was what he always saw first thing in the morning and the last thing at night, but the village saw it whenever he showed face on the streets. They saw the marks getting heavier, they saw them start to become more pronounced. When he first realized that they weren't a common thing he felt like he was special. It set him apart from everyone he saw, and he liked that. Being able to stand out from the crowd was something he loved, leading him to get into heaps of trouble through the vandalizing and overall terror his pranks used to cause. He realized shortly before joining the academy that he wasn't doing himself any favors by continuing the pranks, so he eventually stopped. It was a ninja's job to be discreet after all. When he started to realize that the markings were somehow tied to the village's mistreatment of him, he was 7 when he got an apartment to himself. He can remember the first walk he took around the apartment complex. Not wanting to get lost, he stuck to the 3 blocks outside his home. From those 3 blocks, he quickly realized that life on his own would bring about comparable hardships to his time at the orphanage. The people he encountered were all too eager to steer clear of him, as evidenced by the way they dispersed from him on the streets, the disdainful glances he received, and the hushed murmurs that trailed after him. He didn't come out of the apartment for a few days after that. Carefully, he positioned his fingers on his cheekbone, pulling the skin taut. He lifted the razor to his cheek, with a steady hand, and began to shave over the whisker-like markings. He moved the razor back and forth multiple times, ensuring that no stray hair was left behind. After finishing one cheek, he repeated the process on the other side, only pausing to clean the blade, making sure it was free of any hairs, before continuing. After finishing up with his face and cleaning the mirror, he grabbed his toothbrush and noticed something else that set him apart from others: his teeth. His canines were slightly sharper than most people's, not to the point where he had difficulty closing his mouth or had to file them down, but enough to make him self-conscious when he smiled. Though it was only a cosmetic difference, it always weighed on his mind as he brushed them. They seemed to protrude more prominently, adding to the unique features that made him stand out from the crowd. Rinsing out his mouth, he wiped at his face and left the bathroom, making his way to his front door to get his bag and sandals. He had to be at the academy in an hour and hopefully, they would be given time to work on the henge jutsu they had recently been taught, bringing his jutsu repertoire to a solid 2 with the kawarimi under his belt also. They were due to learn the bunshin jutsu in a few months as well as to prepare them for graduation at the end of the year. But he hoped for extra practice today on the henge as it would make it a whole lot easier if he had a way to blend into a crowd rather than stand out. With a deep sigh, he tightened his sandal strap and grabbed his bag before stepping out of the door into the cool morning breeze, glad about his decision to forego wearing a windbreaker, knowing it would heat up later in the day. Instead, he wore a tan shirt and blue shorts, knowing the colors would keep him cool in the blistering fire country heat. As he descended the stairs, he allowed his gaze to look to the streets and couldn't help the little apprehension that rose in him as he knew what lay ahead in his routine walk. With his foot meeting the gravel, he steeled his gaze and set off on a steady walk towards the academy. He could feel the eyes already on him, as few passed him by going about their business, but with his bag slung over his shoulder and his eyes fixed ahead, he refused to let them see him falter. As he made his familiar journey to the academy, Naruto let his body move on autopilot and allowed his mind to drift to his classmates. Even though it was his final year at the academy, he hadn't made any solid friends. However, this year had started off slightly different than the past 3. With him managing to snag the back row window seat, the best seat in his opinion, made it so he only had to interact with the person to his right. That person fell to Hayashi Shiho, the reason being that there weren't any more seats left to take. She seemed like a nice enough girl, a little spacey at times, but her academic ability wasn't anything to sneeze at, as she was always a top performer when it came to the written tests. The few times that they had interacted with each other, she was the one that usually initiated the conversations with him. As little and mundane as they usually were, it was a welcome thing for the blonde, as having someone other than the Ichirakus to speak to was always welcome. Although he had fewer interactions with her than Shiho, Inuzuka Hana was another person in their class that he had engaged with over the years. The clan girl stood out with her 3 ninkin that would usually accompany her to class. From what he's observed, she was laid back when it came to her studies, usually matching him in the middle level when it came to grades. However, when it came to sparring, Naruto usually found himself wishing he wouldn't be pitted against her for the sole reason of how vicious the girl could be. She was never one for the rules, which he appreciated, as there were none when it came to a fight, which meant that he would always end up getting a kick in the groin or a finger in the eye when he would spar with her. He was grateful for the fact that Funano-sensei put a stop to her using all of the triplets in spars after an incident in their second year when they had taken down a kid without her lifting a finger. Their spars usually ended up with him as the victor. He wasn't sure whether it was his height, weight, or skill that gave him the edge over her, but he liked to joke that it was his good looks that gave him the power. Obviously, with him winning meant that she was the loser, and he quickly found out after their first few spars in the early years that she didn't take kindly to losing. She would always find a new way to keep him on his toes, that's for sure. Since his first day at the academy, he had formed a rivalry with a fierce Inuzuka and as of recently become somewhat acquainted with a scatter-brained bookworm. I could have done a lot worse, he thought, as he compared his 2 academy acquaintances to the father and daughter duo that he would consider family, the Ichirakus. When he moved into his apartment 6 years ago, he stumbled upon Tuki closing up his ramen stand on a night when he was out still grasping the area. Despite his initial reluctance, the old cook sensed something was amiss and invited him in for a bowl of ramen, and even sent him home with a bag of leftovers. As he continued to visit the stand, Tuki's warm smile and kind demeanor quickly won him over, and in the years following the man became a father figure for the blonde. He instilled a sense of values in him and became one of the driving factors behind him choosing to stop causing, and getting into, trouble. The other factor that contributed to his decision to turn over a new leaf was Tuki's daughter, Ayame. He couldn't help but smile as he reminisced about the day he met her. She had come to the ramen stand one afternoon after finishing school and had witnessed Tuki reprimanding him for skipping class. Tuki then introduced him to Ayame, and even now he could still vividly recall how she had shyly withdrawn into herself when he had invaded her personal space. Geez, I was an idiot, he thought, shaking his head at the fond memory. When he made his first friend his age, at first, he found it challenging to navigate the do's and don'ts of interacting with girls, and Tuki would often chuckle and say, "It only gets tougher to understand them as they get older, kid." However, their friendship grew into an inseparable bond that he couldn't imagine living without. He cherished the fact that Ayame wasn't a shinobi, as it allowed him to escape the stress of the academy when they hung out, except for when they both nagged him about improving his grades. In addition, with a lot of free time on his hands when he wasn't studying or training, he found himself working part-time at the stand. It all started when he made fun of Ayame for tearing up while cutting onions. She promptly dragged him behind the counter and challenged him to do better. Jokingly, he threatened he would steal her job, but she surprised him by suggesting he should actually work with them. Tuki had agreed, and for the past 2 years, he had been an indispensable member of the Ichirakus, although not without a few cuts and burns. As he neared the end of his journey, Naruto couldn't help but smile at the thought of Ichirakus. They never failed to bring a sense of warmth and comfort to him. As he approached the academy, he saw a few early bird students already there, chatting and laughing amongst themselves. The insecure thoughts that had plagued him just under an hour ago were now long gone. In their place, a fierce determination burned within him as he thought of graduating at the end of the year. He was determined to overcome any obstacle that stood in his way, especially since he knew Ayame would never let him live it down if he failed. He would graduate and become a skilled shinobi. He would prove to those who looked down on him that he was capable of becoming a strong shinobi. As he strode confidently through the academy halls, he easily found his classroom. Pushing open the door, he made his way towards his seat, his eyes blazed with determination with his mind set on the future. He looked forward to the upcoming months and the future ahead of him. He knew they were going to be difficult, but he was ready to face them head-on and prove himself. Chapter 2. Shiho stood in line watching as one by one each student was called forth and told to perform the Bunshin Jutsu. She couldn't help but feel nervous as she waited her turn. She was confident in her ability to perform it, but she couldn't help the nerves that swam around her gut as the line grew smaller and smaller. Time had flown by quickly in the past few months and now graduation was just around the corner, with only a few weeks left. Shiho felt confident in her abilities but knew there was always room for improvement, especially in areas such as Shuriken Jutsu and Taijutsu. Despite her confidence, a nagging feeling of uncertainty lingered within her, reminding her that anything could happen in the final moments leading up to graduation. Despite her dedication and hard work, Shiho was well aware of her limitations when it came to the physical aspects of ninja training. Unlike some of her classmates who relished in the thrill of sparring in hand-to-hand combat, like Inuzuka-san and Uzumaki-kun, she struggled to find enjoyment in such activities. Nevertheless, she knew that it was an essential part of her job as a ninja and always gave her best effort. While she was better in certain areas, such as weapons training, she was still far from where she wanted to be and was determined to improve. Her academic ability, on the other hand, was what kept her in good standing within the class. She had a natural talent for written tests and could perform the 3 academy jutsu without issue, despite the few times that nerves would interfere when it came to class performances. "Uzumaki, you're up," Funano-sensei called out. As Shiho stood second in line, she watched with anticipation as Naruto stepped forth to perform the Bunshin Jutsu. He went through the 3 hand seals with confidence, but his expression betrayed a hint of annoyance. In a burst of smoke, a clone appeared beside him in the smoke, but as it cleared the class was met with a sickly pale imitation of the blonde. The clone looked as if it had no strength to move. "That's the 3rd week in a row, Uzumaki," Funano-sensei said, a stern frown set across his pudgy face. "Your clones are getting weaker instead of stronger. What's going on?" Naruto shrugged, his face stoic with a hint of exasperation as he replied, "I dunno, sensei. I've been practicing every day, but I still can't get the jutsu down." Shiho observed as some of her classmates behind her snickered behind his back, making a few rude remarks about his abilities. She felt a pang of sympathy for him as she knew that this was the only thing that he seemed to struggle with, but she also felt a sense of admiration for the way he shook off their comments with ease. "Well, you better figure it out fast, Uzumaki," Funano-sensei said sternly. "The graduation exam is coming up and if you can't produce a decent clone, then you won't be passing." Naruto nodded silently, turning on his heel as he made his way back to his seat. Shiho noticed a frown set on his face as he went. Despite the comments and snickers from their classmates, he didn't seem affected by Funano-sensei's words as he looked as if he was already figuring out how to fix his problem. She was never one to meddle in other people's affairs, but she couldn't help but wonder why he was struggling with the jutsu. After all, she remembered him being the first in their class to master the henge technique and one of the first to learn kawarimi. His difficulty with this particular jutsu simply didn't make any sense to her. Despite feeling sorry for him, her curiosity was also piqued. She decided that she would offer her help if he wanted it. Doing so would also mean that she was stepping out of her comfort zone, but she would commit to helping a future comrade. "Hayashi, your turn," Funano-sensei said, bringing her out of her thoughts. Right after she performed the jutsu herself. "Yes, sensei." Stepping forth, she ran through the seals easily enough, an exact copy of herself coming into existence beside her. Funano-sensei commended her, "Good job, Hayashi. Your hand seals were quick and precise." He then pointed out, "There is a slight color difference on your clone's glasses, so make sure to correct that next time and you will get full marks." Shiho nodded and thanked him for the feedback. Shiho returned to her seat, watching on as Funano-sensei assessed the final few of the class. She looked over at the blonde who was ruffling through his bag for something. Deciding that there's no time like the present, she leaned in and whispered, "Excuse me, Uzumaki-kun." The sudden voice made the blonde jump a little. Turning to her with a sheepish look on his face, Shiho chose to press on, "I was wondering if you'd like a hand in figuring out what you're doing wrong with the jutsu." Another set of eyes doesn't hurt. Naruto eyed her cautiously. Why would you do that for me? Shiho understood his questioning. It was a spur-of-the-moment thing she thought of herself, and they hadn't interacted with each other than a few passing comments. Well, we're classmates, and we'll be working together in the future. We should help each other whenever we can. Naruto hesitated. I appreciate it, Hayashi, but I don't want to take up your personal time. You have your own training to worry about. Shiho smiled gently. Don't worry about it. I'm happy to help. Besides, if I help you with your problem, you can help me with my shuriken jutsu and taijutsu. She offered him her hand. So, is it a deal? Naruto took a second before shaking it, a small smile on his face. Alright, Hayashi. It's a deal. It wasn't long until Funano-sensei called the class to attention once more. Shiho and Naruto both returned to their textbooks. The man moved them on to tackle practice exam questions. Naruto groaned as they were instructed to turn to the trajectories revision page. Shiho couldn't help but giggle at his frustration. Shiho checked the clock on the wall, realizing they only had an hour until the break. Just an hour until you're free, Uzumaki-kun, she joked with a small smile. Naruto grunted in response, already focusing on the trajectory question in front of him. Shiho chuckled softly before doing the same. For the next hour, they worked diligently on the practice exam questions. Shiho quickly scribbled her answers while Naruto stuck to his own pace through each problem. The classroom was filled with the sound of scratching pencils and occasional sighs of frustration. Finally, the bell rang, signaling the end of their morning classes. Shiho let out a sigh of relief, stretching her arms above her head. I'm glad that's over, she said, gathering her books and stationery. Naruto quickly followed suit, grabbing his bag and slinging it over his shoulder. Both making their way outside to the courtyard, the sun beating down on them. Shiho led them over to a nearby tree, the shade providing them some shade for their impromptu training. She sat down, leaning her back against the trunk, while Naruto stood across from her, tossing his bag to the side. Okay Uzumaki-kun, she started, mold the chakra for the Bunshin and we will start there. Naruto nodded and closed his eyes, focusing on molding the chakra for the Bunshin jutsu. Shiho watched him carefully and noticed that there was nothing visually wrong. He was doing the correct seals and he was doing them faster than her. That meant that it was down to the chakra he was loading the jutsu with. A moment later, there was a puff of smoke as Naruto's clone appeared in front of him. The clone looked sickly and disfigured, a clear indication that something was wrong with Naruto's chakra control. How are you molding the chakra? Shiho asked, watching as Naruto stomped on the clone. What do you mean? I'm doing it like everyone else, Naruto replied, patting his lower abdomen. I mold it here slowly, allow it to build up and spread it across my body while I form the seals, which then activates the jutsu and then the clone appears. Shiho nodded, deciding to ignore the simplification of their chakra pathway. Naruto's chakra control was still off, and it was affecting the quality of his jutsu. Do you still do the leaf concentration exercise? Naruto nodded and picked up a rock from the ground. He placed it on his forehead and closed his eyes, focusing on his chakra. A moment later, the rock attached itself to his forehead, held in place by his chakra. I got to this point so I just stopped. He pointed to the rock. If I can do it with stuff that's heavier than a leaf, then that must mean I've mastered it. Shiho was taken aback by Naruto's misunderstanding of chakra control. She clapped her hands together to grab his attention and he looked at her with a confused expression. Shiho could see where he was coming from, as just as lifting heavier weights can lead to muscle growth, the same doesn't apply to chakra control. You've displayed the usual boy behavior Uzumaki-kun, she smiled, thinking bigger is better. But when it comes to controlling chakra, it's the opposite silly. She turned and plucked a leaf from a low-hanging branch. Having a large chakra capacity can actually make it harder to control it. Therefore, to improve your control, you need to concentrate on smaller outputs. She ripped the leaf into quarters and placed a piece onto the middle of his forehead. Now, try to bring the smallest strand of chakra to the point where this little piece will stick, she instructed. What was your longest time for holding a leaf? Oh, about 3 hours, I think. I got bored around then and took it off, he replied, closing his eyes and focusing on the task at hand. Shiho was impressed. The task at sticking it was easy, but even when she used to challenge herself to stick it to her forehead, she would start getting a headache just after the hour mark. So, to say that he got to 3 hours was a show of how much chakra he has along with his level of patience. Feeling Naruto's finger push her wrist away, Shiho realized that he had succeeded in making the small part of the leaf stick to his forehead. The intense look on his face showed how hard he was concentrating. She decided to remain silent, not wanting to interrupt his focus, and took a few steps back to resume her seated position with her back against the tree. As she waited, she decided to occupy herself by pulling out a small puzzle book from her backpack. It was filled with several types of puzzles, from crosswords to Sudoku and logic puzzles. She enjoyed reading it when she had spare time, finding it to be a good mental exercise. Flipping through the pages, she came across a particularly challenging logic puzzle that caught her eye. As she began to read through the clues and try to solve it, she became completely engrossed in the task at hand. The sound of Naruto's breathing and the distant noises from the other students faded into the background as she focused her attention on the puzzle. It wasn't until 15 minutes later that Naruto's concentration broke. The tiny piece of leaf fell from his forehead, getting swept up by the breeze. He opened his eyes to see Shiho in deep concentration whilst looking at a book, fidgeting with a pen in her free hand. Deciding to give her the same courtesy she did for him, he quietly planted himself down on the grass and allowed himself to lay back, looking up at the clouds. The remainder of their time went by like that until the bell broke Naruto out of his cloud gazing. Getting up, he noticed that Shiho had still yet to move. Laughing to himself, he tapped her forehead, signaling to the students running back inside. He chuckled seeing her face take on a pinkish hue. "What's so funny?" she asked, trying to hide her embarrassment. "Even when we're not in class, your head is in a book. Do you ever take a break from studying?" Shiho let out a small laugh, still embarrassed. "I just enjoy reading, that's all, and besides it isn't like it's a bad thing," she said, looking down at the book she had in her hands. Naruto turned, his hands behind his head as they walked back to their class. "Well, you better make sure you're prepared for our training session later. I won't go easy on you, bookworm." Amusement was evident in his voice. Despite his back being turned, Shiho smiled at him. This was the first time that they had actually hung out in their 4 years as classmates, but she could already tell that offering to help him with his little dilemma was something that was already bearing fruit, and maybe a good friendship would come of it in their final month. She didn't mind that a lot of people tended to avoid him. She preferred to value personal experience over preconceived notions or assumptions, and from the little that they had spoken in their little chakra lesson at break, she knew that Uzumaki Naruto was a good person. "I wouldn't expect you to, Uzumaki-kun," she said as they both entered their classroom, Funano-sensei closing the door behind them. As the promise of after-class training loomed in Shiho's mind, time seemed to fly by as Funano-sensei continued his lecture. Before they knew it, the bell had rung, signaling the end of class. She hastily packed her belongings and glanced at her deskmate, who was already poised to leave with his bag slung over his shoulder. "Ready?" he asked, gesturing towards the door. Shiho nodded and fell in step beside him as they left the classroom, making their way through the academy halls. As they stepped out of the academy building, Shiho realized that Naruto was leading her away from the courtyard. She furrowed her brows in confusion and asked, "Are we not using the academy grounds?" Naruto shook his head and replied, "Nah, it's not just us that would be using them, and besides, dealing with others gets annoying after a while." His response made Shiho realize he must have had issues with others before. "What training ground are we going to use then?" she asked, curious. Instead of answering, Naruto simply tapped the side of his nose, a smirk on his face. Shiho shrugged it off and decided to trust him. As they made their way through the bustling village, Shiho couldn't help but notice the curious gazes that Naruto was attracting from the people around them. Despite the attention, he seemed completely unfazed, walking with his head held high and a lax smile on his face. For Shiho, it was a bit confusing. When she first joined the academy, she had heard rumors about Naruto's wrongdoings, the time he vandalized the Hokage faces being the most infamous. However, she hadn't seen or heard him do anything since then, and it was stupid for people to be still hung up over something that happened years ago. Feeling uncomfortable under the weight of the stairs, Shiho unconsciously slowed her pace and began to trail behind Naruto. She made a mental note to ask him about it later, but for now, she kept her head down and focused on keeping up with her classmate. It wasn't until they had been walking for 20 minutes that she realized they were headed for the village outskirts as buildings became scarce as the dirt path turned into a forest trail. Shiho's eyes looked around in curiosity as they entered a small clearing surrounded by tall trees. In the center of the clearing stood a single training post, and off to the side was a small sparring circle, its border made of small stones. Naruto noticed her curiosity and splayed his arms. "Welcome to my secret training spot. It ain't much, but I've been using it for a while now. I can see why, it seems peaceful," she said, placing her bag down on the grass. "Right, let's start off on improving your aim," he said, pointing towards the post. "Then after an hour or so we can do a light spar if you want." Finding the plan to be solid, she marched alongside him once again until they were 10 meters from the post. He pulled out a kunai and threw it at the wooden post, hitting the bullseye mark dead on. Gesturing for her to give it a try, he handed her a kunai. She took it, focusing on her stance and grip before throwing it. With a solid thunk, the kunai wedged itself just a few centimeters from Naruto's own. It wasn't a bad throw, but she knew she could do better with some pointers, and that's why she is here. "Again," he said, and as she got into a stance, she felt him adjust her footing by moving her foot a little forward. "Loosen your body a bit and keep throwing until you run out," he instructed. Following his advice, she threw the kunai again and noticed that her movements felt more fluid. Naruto could tell that she was getting a hang of it. "Don't worry about hitting the mark every time. Just focus on your form and let the kunai do the rest," he said. She took a deep breath and continued throwing, each time getting closer to the bullseye until she finally hit it dead on. This continued for another hour, Naruto letting her have a break every time he went and collected the kunai. By the 10-minute mark, Shiho was already sweating, but she didn't complain. She knew that the training was helping her improve, and she wanted to make the most of the opportunity so she can improve by the end of the month. "Good job," Naruto complimented. "You're getting the hang of it. Now let's start sparring," he said as he made his way over to the makeshift sparring ring. Once in the makeshift ring, he quickly turned and threw a straight fist towards her. Surprised by the sudden action, she froze as his fist hovered in front of her nose. "I've noticed before in class that you always freeze up when someone catches you off guard," he said. Following his arm, he saw him smiling at her. "So that's the first thing you need to correct." His observation skills surprised her, but it made sense considering he was at the top of the class in taijutsu. "What's the next thing?" she asked, raising her fists. "Secondly, you're too textbook, which makes sense considering you always have your head in one," he snorts, "but that means you're easily readable, so start adding random moves into it and make your own kind of style." As Naruto's words sunk in, Shiho felt a mix of surprise and embarrassment. She had always prided herself on being diligent and following the rules, but now she realized that it had made her predictable in combat. As she thought back on Naruto's past fights, she began to see the truth in his words. His unorthodox style had caught opponents off guard and given him an advantage. "Thank you, Uzumaki-kun," she said sincerely. "I can't believe I didn't look at it that way. Can you show me how to mix things up?" Naruto smiled at her eagerness to improve and stepped forward, demonstrating a few quick moves. "Like this," he said as he performed an elbow strike, followed by a sudden knee kick. "Or this," he continued, performing a spinning back kick, using his arms as a way to create momentum. "Just remember to stay loose and keep your opponent guessing." As Shiho watched, she began to see the potential in incorporating unorthodox moves into her style. She tried a few herself, feeling awkward at first, but gradually getting the hang of it. Naruto encouraged her, pointing out where she could improve and offering helpful tips along the way. By the end of the session, Shiho felt more confident in her ability to mix things up and surprise her opponents in future fights. Naruto gestured for Shiho to spar with him, and she steeled herself, determined to put the tips he had given her to use. As they began their bout, Naruto initially allowed her to take the offensive. He would occasionally kick the inside of her leg to destabilize her, or push her aside, making her stumble. Despite this, Shiho persisted, adapting to his unorthodox style, and throwing in some random moves of her own. As the sparring continued, Shiho began to implement the tips that Naruto had given her. She started to incorporate random moves into her attacks, making it difficult for Naruto to predict her next move. However, Naruto was quick to respond with his own unorthodox style of fighting, using his elbows and headbutts to throw Shiho off balance. Despite being on the defensive for most of the match, Shiho refused to give up. She tried to stay focused on her breathing and movements, using Naruto's attacks to her advantage by redirecting them and counter-attacking. Naruto could see that Shiho was already beginning to improve with the little tips he had given her. Her movements became more fluid and less predictable, and she was starting to anticipate his attacks better. He was impressed by her determination. Deciding to push herself to the limit, Shiho threw a punch with all her might, but she overextended her arm, leaving herself vulnerable. Taking advantage of the opening, Naruto latched onto her and used her own momentum to throw her over his back. Shiho hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of her and the day's training finally catching up to her. She lay there for a moment, noticing that the sky was beginning to darken. As Naruto's head came into view, Shiho couldn't help but feel a sense of embarrassment. Despite knowing that she couldn't beat him, it was a little humiliating. "You want to finish for today?" he asked, a knowing glint in his eye. Glad that her flushed face from sparring hid her embarrassment, Shiho gasped for air before responding. "Yes please," she managed to say between deep breaths, her body trying to regain its energy. Chuckling to himself, Naruto made his way over to their bags, picked them both up, and returned to Shiho, who was still lying on the ground. He presented her his hand, and she pulled herself up, giving a quick thanks. She took her bag from him, and the two began walking back to the village. Shiho had never felt so drained after a training session in a long time. Typically, she only got out of breath during her regular jogs to maintain her fitness. She turned to Naruto, feeling a bit nervous. Uzumaki-kun, she said, catching his attention. "Do you think we could spar again sometime? Maybe up until the exams?" She glanced at the trees, feeling a little embarrassed. "I don't have anyone else to practice with outside of class and—" "Sure thing," Naruto replied, surprising Shiho with his quick agreement. "We can spar whenever I'm off work and a few times after classes end, if that suits you." Shiho nodded her head in agreement, a smile on her face. "Yes, that works. Thank you," she said gratefully. Naruto, who was unused to people thanking him, looked away uncomfortably. Yeah, don't mention it," he mumbled, prompting Shiho to raise her eyebrow at the reaction. As they walked, they both fell silent, lost in their own thoughts. Before they knew it, they had made it back into the bustling village. The evening rush of people out for dinner flooded the streets, and Naruto and Shiho joined them, traversing the busy roads. Eventually, they reached a crossroads, both heading in opposite directions. Promising to make a plan for training at the academy before bidding each other goodnight. On her walk home, Shiho could tell already that the next few weeks were going to be vital in her improving herself for graduation. A small part of her hoped that it wouldn't always be this sore, but she was smarter than that. It would only get harder from here on out. Chapter 3. As Shiho approached the academy, a yawn escaped her mouth. She had been unable to sleep last night due to the building nerves of graduation. Despite the lack of rest, she felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. A whole month had passed since she and Naruto had promised to train with each other to improve themselves. In the first week, they discovered that Naruto was underpowering his Bunshin and that the chakra control exercise had helped him to feel for it more easily and determine his output. He described the process of molding the correct amount of chakra to putting his hand in a lake and trying to pull out an exact amount. It was difficult and he occasionally put a little too much chakra into it, creating excess smoke, but it didn't matter because he could perform the jutsu without any problem now and would be able to graduate. Despite the bruises that formed on her body, Shiho couldn't have been happier with her progress. Naruto had kept his promise to not take it easy on her during their training sessions, and she was grateful for the challenge. One spar, in particular, had resulted in a knee to her face, causing her glasses to snap and blood to pour from her nose. Naruto had hesitated for the first time, clearly shocked at what he had done. But that momentary lapse in focus had cost him, as Shiho had used the momentum from the blow to jump up and land a kick straight to his face. It was the most pain she had ever been in, yet she couldn't stop laughing at the absurdity of the situation. As she walked by her classmates on the way to the academy, exchanging good luck wishes with them. Shiho couldn't help but think back on that moment. Naruto had apologized profusely, offering to buy her ramen, which then ended up with her meeting the people he worked with. The Ichirakus were nice. She only spoke with Kyuki briefly, but he seemed kind. His daughter on the other hand wields a ladle lethally. After Naruto explained what had happened in their sparring, Shiho got to witness the usually confident blonde cowering from someone. When Shiho arrived home after sparring with Naruto, her mother's reaction to her bruised face was extreme. The ear-piercing scream that erupted from her mother's mouth startled her father, who immediately thought that something terrible had happened. Although her father, who had achieved the rank of Chunin, understood that sparring could result in injuries, he was still concerned about the severity of his daughter's bruises. After explaining that she had been sparring with Naruto after class, Shiho noticed her mother glaring at her father as if trying to communicate something without speaking. Normally, her father was the more lenient parent, and it was her mother who would scold her when she misbehaved. However, when her father gave her mother a stern look, Shiho realized that he wasn't as soft-hearted as she had thought. Shiho suspected that her parents' reactions had something to do with her hanging around Naruto, which was why she had mentioned his name in the first place. She wanted to gauge their reactions to his name, but her mother's fury caught her off guard. It didn't make sense for her mother to be angry since Naruto didn't even know her parents, and the same was true for her parents knowing Naruto. Just be careful when you hang around him, okay? Her father had asked her, his eyes moving from her mother to her. She had nodded that night, but the whole situation left her confused. She was left wondering why her mother was so furious, and why her father had given her a slight warning. What was so bad about Naruto? As she opened the classroom door, she immediately spotted the boy in question sitting in his seat. But what caught her off guard was seeing the blonde with his head buried in a book, titled, The Plant Whisperer, How to Talk to Your Houseplants Without Sounding Crazy, emblazoned on the cover. She couldn't help but chuckle at how unusual yet fitting the situation was. After their little mishap, it felt like Naruto had opened up to her more. She realized he wasn't the serious and stoic person he presented himself to be in class. It turned out that Naruto had a brash and endearing side to him that she never knew existed. She would always see him come out of his shell when they visited Ichiraku's. Oblivious to her thoughts, Naruto nodded his head at her as he noticed her approach, turning the page of his book. She couldn't resist teasing him about his choice of reading material. A ninja, cook, and now a gardener. What's next on your list of professions? She joked, getting a laugh out of Naruto. Nah, the plants in my house started to look dead, so I thought I'd educate myself on how to take better care of them, Naruto replied. But who knows, maybe I'll open up a ninja gardening business one day. Shiho laughed, I can just see it now, leave it to me, I'm sure it'll be a hit. Naruto chuckled, hey, you never know. Maybe I'll let you work for me. Shiho smiled, enjoying their playful banter. As they waited for class to begin, their conversation meandered towards lighter topics. Naruto delved deeper into his gardening book while Shiho fidgeted in her seat, feeling both thrilled and anxious about the upcoming exam. She knew that they had it in the bag and there was nothing to worry about, but old habits die hard and she just wanted to get it over with. Soon enough, Funano-sensei walked in, test papers in hand, and called the class to attention. He wasted no time in passing out the papers, seeming just as eager to end the day as his students were. You have an hour and a half to complete the test. If I catch anyone cheating, they will fail automatically and can enjoy another year of learning under me, he warned, pulling out his stopwatch and positioning himself at the back of the room for a clear view of all the students. When I say, start, you may begin. And don't talk during this exam either. With a click of the timer, he began the test. Start. Good luck everyone. As per the teacher's order, the room was filled with deafening silence, only punctuated by the sound of pens scribbling and occasionally frustrated grunts from students struggling to recall information. Naruto found himself able to answer all the questions, although he had to put some extra effort into a few of them. Now, he sat with his hands clasped, chin resting on them, waiting for the final 10 minutes of the exam in silence. He suspected Shiho was in the same situation, judging by the sound of her pencil hitting the desk a few moments ago, but he didn't risk looking over at her in case Funano-sensei caught him. As he waited for the time to run out, Naruto started thinking about the next parts of the exam. He knew they would be tested on their physical abilities first before moving on to the 3 jutsu. His gaze wandered across the rest of the class, and he noticed a handful of other students in the same boat as him, waiting for the time to run out. He noticed his one-sided rival Inuzuka Hana had her head resting on her arms. Despite her being a hothead in the ring, Naruto had to admit that she had a good head on her shoulders when it came to studying. He wouldn't be surprised if she passed the exam with flying colors. He also noticed that only one of her 3 ninkin was with her today, and it seemed to be staring at him as if it knew he was thinking about its owner. Not wanting to back down from the canine's intense gaze, Naruto locked eyes with the mutt and held it there, determined to outlast it for the remaining minutes of the exam. He refused to be the first one to look away, even if it was just a dog. The mutt suddenly straightened its back and perked up its ears, almost as if it was accepting the challenge. What am I doing, he thought ludicrously. He was having a stare down with a ninkin on the day of his exam. At that moment, Funano-sensei called an end to the exam. Everyone, stand up and leave your papers on your desk. Make your way to the courtyard. Beko-sensei and Akame-sensei will divide you into groups and begin your physical tests, he announced. Naruto maintained eye contact with Hana's dog as he made his way down the steps, feeling a sense of satisfaction as he watched her command the dog to move, forcing it to break eye contact. Not noticing the weird look Shiho was giving him as she bore witness to it all. Out in the courtyard, Beko-sensei instructed him to join his group as the class was split into 2 groups to make this portion move along faster. He lined up behind a boy with platinum blonde hair and waited for his name to be called out for his examination. He watched patiently, one by one as his group went through their taijutsu exam with Beko-sensei, wincing when one of the boys tried for a fancy kick only to land awkwardly on his ritz when their sensei hit them midair. That's easily a sprain, the voice of Inuzuka Hana said from his left, surprising him as he never realized how he had zoned out watching the spars. Nodding his head in agreement, yeah, surprised it never snapped, looking at the twig of a boy get back up nursing his wrist, the guy is all bone. That got a snort from his ninkin user classmate, yeah, and I bet he thought he was doing something special trying a move like that, Hana replied with a smirk. Naruto chuckled, yeah, don't pull off a move if you ain't sure if it'll land. Hana nodded in agreement, I'd rather stick to what works and gets the job done. Fancy moves might look good, but they won't help you in a real fight. Hey, stick to what works, he mocked, you do realize you have flesh-tearing mutts to help you, Naruto said with a laugh. If anything was flashy it was when she had all 3 of them at once attacking a target. Hana rolled her eyes, hey, they're good boys, they just have a bit of a strong grip, she said with a smirk. Naruto chuckled, yeah, I know, I've been on the receiving end of it a few times, he said with a small frown, remembering the times when she would allow one onto the field. As they continued to wait for their turn, they watched as the rest of their group finished their exams. Beko-sensei called out for Hana next, telling her to leave her dog with it being an individual exam. Looks like it's my turn. Good luck when you're up. Naruto watched as Hana made her way to the testing area, her ninkin staying put next to him. Looking down at the pup he found it continuing from where they left off. Shrugging his shoulders he lowered himself, so he was face to face with the dog, its eyes staring into his own. Surprising him, the dog licked his face, the slimy tongue leaving a coat across his cheek. Well, that was disgusting, he said, the dog barking in response. Naruto's attention shifted from Hana in the distance to the dog, who was looking at him expectantly. He sighed and shook his head, the puppy eyes were hard to resist, and he scratched behind its ears, getting it to lie on the floor for further pampering. Lost in the moment of clapping the dog, he didn't see Hana walking back over to them, done with her test. She couldn't help but chuckle at the sight of him pampering the pup. Looks like you've made a new friend, she said with a smirk. Naruto looked up from the dog and saw Hana's amused expression. Yeah, well, he's a persistent little guy, he said, scratching the dog's belly. Uzumaki, step forward, the rough voice of Beko-sensei called from the ring. Giving the dog one last pat he made his way over to the man as Hana walked back inside to carry out the next exam. Right kid, I'm testing you on how well your technique and form are, how accurate your strikes are and the power and speed behind them. He lifted a finger as he recalled the test factors, along with how many successful strikes you land or block, got that? He nodded, backing away from the man. readying his stance by distributing equal weight across his feet, his right foot slightly forward than his left. His fists came up to his chin to protect his face from when Beko-sensei would strike, and also rolled his shoulders slightly forward for extra chin protection from the side, waiting for Beko-sensei to start. Beko-sensei moved forward first, starting with a series of jabs and hooks, throwing punches with precision and speed. Beko-sensei tried to dodge, but Naruto was too quick for him. Suddenly, Naruto landed a solid punch on Beko-sensei's chin, staggering him back. Beko-sensei stepped up his attacks, throwing powerful kicks and punches that were harder for Naruto to dodge. But Naruto kept going, his movements fluid and graceful as he evaded Beko-sensei's attacks. As Beko-sensei went for a low sweep, Naruto took advantage of the momentum and twisted his body, landing a solid kick to the side of Beko-sensei's head. Beko-sensei stumbled back, his balance thrown off. Naruto continued to press the attack, throwing a flurry of punches and kicks. Beko-sensei tried to counter, but Naruto was too fast for him. Finally, Beko-sensei landed a punch to Naruto's gut, knocking the wind out of him. But Naruto didn't let that stop him. He used the momentum of the blow to create space and recover. But Beko-sensei wasn't done yet. He charged at Naruto with renewed vigor, determined to land another hit. Naruto, however, had other plans. Instead of backing away again, he planted his feet firmly on the ground and waited for Beko-sensei to close in. As the sensei lunged forward, Naruto sidestepped and redirected the attack, using Beko-sensei's momentum against him. With a swift kick to the back of the sensei's knee, Naruto brought him down to the ground. As Beko-sensei stumbled, Naruto landed a series of strikes on his opponent's back and shoulders, scoring several points in quick succession. As the minute came to an end, Beko-sensei got back to his feet, his face flushed with annoyance. Naruto was breathing hard, but he couldn't help grinning. He had managed to land several good hits and had even managed to dodge and redirect some of Beko-sensei's attacks. It was a small victory, but one that filled him with pride, even if the Chunin had held back a little. "Good technique, kid," the strict taijutsu instructor complimented, actually surprising him a little. The Chunin pointed towards the academy assembly hall. "Make your way in there and sit tight until Akame-sensei calls your group for the Shuriken Jutsu exam." Naruto nodded his head in acknowledgement, feeling a sense of pride in his chest as he made his way towards the assembly hall. As he walked, he couldn't help but replay the fight in his mind, thinking of ways he could have improved his technique. But overall, he was pleased with how he performed. Entering the hall, he saw that it was already filled with other students from other classes waiting for their final test. He found an empty seat towards the back of the room and sat down, stretching out his limbs to ease the tension in his muscles. Naruto scanned the crowded assembly hall, packed with graduating students from other classes. Amid the sea of unfamiliar faces, he managed to spot a few of his classmates. He noticed Shiho's distinctive light blonde hair from across the room but decided to leave her be, sensing her nervous energy from afar. Naruto had faith in her abilities. She had improved remarkably in the past month just from their sparring sessions, and her Shuriken Jutsu had also come a long way. He suspected she was just overthinking things, as usual, but hoped she would perform well in the taijutsu section with Beko-sensei. He knew she would be a force to be reckoned with in the taijutsu portion of the exam, having seen firsthand the improvements she had made. He felt rather relaxed despite the tension emanating from some of his fellow graduates. He had trained hard for this day and knew he was prepared. He just wanted to get it over with so he could finally focus on climbing the ranks. He decided to lean back in his seat and rest his eyes for a bit, letting the sounds of nervous chatter and shifting chairs wash over him. He knew that soon enough, his name would be called, and he would be asked to show his Shuriken Jutsu skills, and then his ninjutsu performance afterwards. It had been 30 minutes since Shiho spotted her new friend walk into the assembly hall, and she was grateful that he either didn't notice her or had left her to focus on her own. As she began to follow Beko-sensei out to complete her second last exam, she was determined to put on a good standing. She had been a part of those who were on the lower end when it came to taijutsu in class, but she had risen to be able to fight at least those in the middle of her class over the last month. She would show that today. She let the rhythmic tapping of her heel help her focus as she and the rest of her group watched the other students trade blows with Beko-sensei. It was clear that their instructor was holding back, as a few jabs from some of the students managed to catch him off guard, but he always retaliated with a smack of his own. The sound of the punches and grunts filled the hall, adding to the tense atmosphere. Shiho couldn't help but feel a twinge of nervousness as she waited for her turn. As she watched some of her peers leave the field in tears after taking a beating, Shiho couldn't help but feel a twinge of doubt. She saw a student she had once struggled with nursing his arm as he made his way back into the building for the final test. It was a stark reminder of how high the stakes were and how much she had to prove in order to pass. Despite her nerves, she tried to focus on the task at hand and block out the distractions around her, determined to give it her all in the taijutsu portion of the exam. She saw their instructor pull out a clipboard, and turn to the group, causing Shiho's nerves to twist in her gut as he zoned in on her. "Hayashi, your turn," he called out. Nodding, she quickly quelled the nerves tightening in her stomach and made her way over to stand against her instructor. To avoid breaking another pair of glasses, she took them off and placed them to the side, squinting a little more as she tried to focus her eyes without them. With her heart pounding in her ears, Shiho nodded along to Beko-sensei's instructions, already knowing what he was testing based on the previous fights she had witnessed. She clenched her knuckles at her side, mentally preparing for what was to come. As he raised his hand into the academy fighting stance, she mirrored his movements and made the necessary adjustments to her stance, honed over the past month of training. Without warning, Beko-sensei moved to attack, and Shiho quickly dodged by ducking and rolling under his strike. She managed to avoid his knee aimed at her chest and took advantage of his momentary stumble to land a kick on his calf, followed by another on his back that pushed him to the edge of the ring. Despite her advantage, Shiho knew not to overextend herself and quickly jumped back to put some distance between them. As she caught her breath, she kept track of her score. 2 hits landed. Her heart still pounding, she readied herself for whatever Beko-sensei had in store next. Beko-sensei by now had turned and advanced on her once more, but instead of waiting she surprised him by meeting in the middle, throwing a punch to his midsection. He blocked it, attempting to grab her wrist for a swinger takedown, but she jerked her arm out of his reach, following it up with a jumping knee. Beko-sensei caught her off guard by stepping out of reach and throwing his kick to her side whilst she was still mid-air, throwing off her balance as she hit the floor. Not wanting to be caught on the ground, she rolled out of the way, bouncing back up, narrowly avoiding the strike he aimed for her body. Her adrenaline was at a high from the close call. She could feel the sweat that had built up on her face from the short time they had been sparring. Beko-sensei was quick to follow up his missed strike, and he lunged forward with a punch to her face. Shiho leaned back, dodging the punch by a hair's breadth, and countered with a roundhouse kick to his ribs. It connected with a satisfying thud, and she felt a sense of satisfaction at the hit. But the satisfaction was short-lived as Beko-sensei retaliated with a spinning back fist that Shiho had no time to dodge. The blow landed squarely on her cheekbone, and she felt her head snap to the side with the impact. She stumbled, her head spinning, and almost fell to the ground. Shiho shook her head, trying to clear the haze, and saw Beko-sensei coming at her again. She took a deep breath, planted her feet firmly, and got ready to face him once more. Quickly regained her composure and charged at Beko-sensei, unleashing a series of quick punches and kicks. Beko-sensei parried most of them, but Shiho managed to slip in a few strikes, hitting him 4 times in quick succession. Beko-sensei was momentarily stunned, surprised by Shiho's speed and agility. He regained his footing quickly and launched a counterattack, aiming for Shiho's legs with a sweeping kick. Shiho saw the attack coming and leapt into the air, dodging the kick with a graceful flip. As she landed, Shiho spun around and landed a solid punch to Beko-sensei's side. He grunted in pain but didn't let up, launching another attack at her. The two continued to exchange blows, their movements fast and fluid as they sparred with each other. The spar continued, with Shiho and Beko-sensei trading blows back and forth. A few students watched in awe as they witnessed Shiho's new progress, and finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the spar came to an end, with both combatants bowing to each other in respect. "Good showing, Hayashi," Beko-sensei complimented. "Make your way back to your classroom and await the final exam." "Good luck." Shiho nodded, relieved to have passed the taijutsu portion of the exam. She made her way back to the classroom, replaying the fight in her head and mentally noting areas where she could have improved. As she walked, she saw some of her peers who had also passed the test, congratulating each other and exchanging words of encouragement. As she entered the classroom, Shiho spotted Naruto already seated at his desk, engrossed in his book on plant care. Despite the impending exam, he appeared surprisingly calm and collected. She couldn't help but smile at his nonchalant attitude towards the test. As she made her way back to her seat, her thoughts turned to the blonde and their time training together. She couldn't help but feel grateful for the skills he had taught her and the progress she had made in such a short time. She made a mental note to thank him again later. The idea of being on a team with him also crossed her mind. She knew it was unlikely, but the thought of having a familiar face on her team was appealing. She had seen how he interacted with others, or the lack thereof, and felt that having him on her team would give her an advantage. Plus, it would be easier to build a rapport with a single new teammate, rather than starting from scratch with 2 new teammates. But she quickly dismissed the thought, knowing that team assignments were made based on skills and compatibility, not friendships or past training partners. She would just have to wait and see who fate would pair her with. "I take it no, you didn't mess up?" he questioned as she sat down in her seat. "No, I messed up twice in the spar, but I bounced back and managed to hit Beko-sensei a good amount of times. I'm positive I got a solid grade." Despite her words, she looked nervous, saying it, causing Naruto to chuckle as he flipped a page in his book. "I'm sure you did great, Hayashi-san. We trained a lot for this, remember?" Shiho smiled. She knew he was right. She had put a lot of effort and time into her training, and it was starting to pay off. As they waited for the final exam to start, Naruto continued to read his book on plant care. Shiho occasionally asked questions on it, never one to hold back the chance for learning, and it managed to lessen her nerves as they conversed back and forth. Naruto noticed that Shiho seemed to be engrossed in their conversation, not realizing that Funano-sensei had already started the final exam register. He respected her unique way of dealing with stress and decided not to push her out of her comfort zone. Observing Shiho looking over at the picture of an iris in his book, Naruto felt a strange mix of emotions. Having been content with only Ayame and Tyuki in his life, he never imagined himself forming another relationship. When Shiho had first reached out to him, he had been wary, as nobody had ever approached him like that before, other than Tyuki offering him a bowl of ramen. Since starting the academy, he had only known her as the girl who excelled in written tests and often shied away from group activities. He had even gambled on her surname when they first spoke, hoping to avoid the embarrassment of getting it wrong. However, spending time with Shiho over the past month had allowed him to add another friend to his life, even if it was unexpected. He appreciated having someone who shared his experiences as a ninja in training and could relate to topics that Ayame and Tyuki sometimes had a hard time understanding. Being able to spar was also a good thing, as many years ago Tyuki didn't take too kindly to him sparring with his daughter after a punch too hard left bruises. After explaining to him that civilians don't get fighting lessons at school, he made sure not to make that mistake again, even if Ayame would pester him for a few lessons. "So, they like being drier." Her comment brought him back, as she read out the book's page. "Yeah, I think I found the reason why mine died," he replied, remembering that would allow a small puddle of water to form in the soil, thinking it would help the plant grow faster. "I might need to stop by a gardening shop to buy better fertilizer as well." "I never would have imagined you having a green thumb, Uzumaki-kun," she remarked, causing him to look at her questioningly. "What would you have imagined me doing, Hayashi-san?" he asked. "I'm not sure," Shiho admitted, looking thoughtful. "Maybe something like, I don't know, training all the time," she finished lamely. Naruto chuckled. "Well, I used to, but Tyuki told me to dial it back a bit so that I didn't get burned out. Ayame was the one that got me to start gardening a little and said that I needed a hobby and training doesn't count, whatever that means." She was about to comment on how it was probably because it is good to have a hobby that is unrelated to your job, future job in their case, but she was called on from the front by Funano-sensei. It quickly got her to stand to attention as she realized that she hadn't been focused on the exam, quickly shooting a small glare at Naruto as he laughed at her. "Come on, Hayashi, we haven't got all day," Funano-sensei called again, gesturing to the door. She quickly left her desk, grabbed her bag and shot one last glare at Naruto, who already had his face back in his book as she did so. falling into line behind her sensei who took her to the opposite classroom for her final test. Once inside, she stood in front of Funano-sensei and Suzume-sensei. Her Kunoichi-sensei gave a small smile and nod of encouragement as she waited for her male teacher to start the exam. She noticed the log sitting on the floor to her right, which she assumed would be used for the kawarimi. The table that stood next to Suzume-sensei held a bundle of forehead protectors. Okay, now Hayashi, we'll start with the henge. You can transform into anyone of your choice, then you can perform the kawarimi with the log to your right and finish up on the bunshin. Funano-sensei informed her as Suzume-sensei wrote something down on her pad. Begin when you're ready. Nodding her head, she took a deep breath and focused on her chakra. She closed her eyes and pictured herself transforming into her sensei, Suzume-sensei. When she opened her eyes, she had successfully transformed into a replica of Suzume-sensei, complete with her clothes, voice, and mannerisms. A smile of satisfaction spread across her face as she realized she had done it perfectly, receiving a small thumbs up from Suzume-sensei. Next up was the kawarimi jutsu, a technique that involved swapping places with an object to avoid an attack. Shiho concentrated hard as she performed the hand seals and focused her chakra. She closed her eyes and visualized herself tethering a line of chakra out to the log, and once she felt it she quickly swapped her position with it. When she opened her eyes, she had successfully swapped places with the nearby log, again eyeing her sensei as they both made notes. Finally, the bunshin jutsu. The technique that started her and Naruto's friendship and the one that would guarantee her position as a leaf ninja. She focused her breathing as she felt her heart begin to pound faster, molding her chakra one last time. She allowed for 3 doppelgangers to appear alongside her, forcing down the smile that threatened to break out across her face. She couldn't celebrate just yet, her sensei could have spotted a mistake that she had missed. She stood anxiously in front of them, hands clenched by her side, and as smiles broke out on their faces, she felt her nerves disappear and allowed pride to wash over her. She watched as Suzume-sensei approached her, with Funano-sensei behind her. Suzume-sensei smiled at Shiho and held out the forehead protector. Congratulations, Hayashi, she said. You have worked hard and earned this. Shiho's hands trembled slightly as she took the forehead protector from Suzume-sensei. She gazed at it, feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment wash over her. As Shiho received her forehead protector from Suzume-sensei, Funano-sensei approached her with a warm smile. Congratulations, Hayashi-san, he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. I wish you all the best in your shinobi career. Remember, as a shinobi, you carry the will of fire within you, Funano-sensei continued. It's the belief that we have a duty to protect our village and the people within it. Keep that in mind always, and you'll go far in your career. Shiho nodded, taking his words to heart. She felt ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead, and she knew that the will of fire would guide her every step of the way. Thank you both for everything. I'll do my best to uphold the will of fire, Shiho said, giving a small bow of respect to both of her sensei. Now it's time for you to leave and go celebrate with your family, and remember to attend class tomorrow for your team placements, Funano-sensei said. After nodding in agreement, Shiho left the classroom and headed outside. She knew that she wouldn't be allowed to go back inside and show Naruto her accomplishment, so she decided to wait for him to finish his exam before going home. Shiho had already informed her parents that she wouldn't know when the exams would finish, so she would be home whenever she was done. As she walked through the front entrance and into the courtyard, her eyes fell upon the tree swing across from the doors that would give her a clear view of when Naruto exited the building. She sat down on the swing and held the leaf insignia in her hands, unsure of how to wear it. She pondered if she should wear it the traditional way, on her arm, around her neck, on her waist, or sewn into her clothing. But she decided that she would make the decision later. Placing the cloth down next to her bag, she reached into it and pulled out the book her uncle had gifted her about cryptoanalysis. The cover was a deep navy blue with gold lettering that read, "The Hidden Meanings," and it felt heavier than it looked. She opened it to where she left off a few pages into the first section and lost herself in the content. Shiho had only managed to read a little of the book since starting it at the beginning of the week, but she was already captivated. As she read through each page, she felt a sense of excitement and wonder at the thought of decoding secret messages and uncovering hidden meanings. She knew that it would take hard work and dedication to become proficient in cryptanalysis, but she was determined to learn as much as she could and expand her shinobi skillset. As time passed, Shiho was completely absorbed in her reading until she was suddenly brought out of it by a flick on her forehead, causing her to yelp. She looked up to see Naruto's smiling face, his black forehead protector around his head, and the metal leaf insignia glinting in the sun. "It's called a forehead protector for a reason, you know," he joked, as she rubbed at her forehead. Shiho let out a small laugh and shook her head. I know, she replied. "I just haven't decided how to wear it yet," she said, putting her book away. He lifted her forehead protector and held it in his hands. "When I took it off the table I put it straight on my head. It just feels right, I dunno why," he said, handing it to her. Shiho smiled as she took the forehead protector from Naruto's hands. She turned it over in her own hands, examining the metal leaf insignia closely. "Maybe I'll try it your way," she said with a small grin, before placing the protector on her forehead and adjusting it carefully. Naruto chuckled as he watched her. "Looks good on you," he said, admiring the way the metal leaf glinted in the sunlight. "You're starting to look like a ninja now," he added with a playful grin. Shiho reddened slightly at the compliment, feeling a sense of pride in her newfound identity as a ninja. Changing the conversation from her, "So, what are you doing to celebrate?" she asked. She figured he would be going to Ichiraku's. "My final shift at Ichiraku's is today." Naruto scratched his head. "I start in an hour, so I'm gonna head there, get a bowl of ramen, and get to work." "You wanna get a bowl before going home, or do you need to be back home?" he asked. Shiho considered his offer but knew she couldn't keep her parents waiting any longer. "Sorry, Uzumaki-kun, as much as I want to, I can't. I don't want to leave my parents waiting any longer," she apologized. Naruto nodded understandingly. "Nah, I understand. Family is important," he said, gazing up at the clouds. As they walked, Shiho couldn't help but ask about Naruto's experience as an orphan. She hesitated, not wanting to be insensitive, but her curiosity got the better of her. "Uzumaki-kun, I don't mean to sound insensitive, and I understand if you don't want to answer, but, what is it like being an orphan?" she asked gently. Naruto smiled softly, appreciating her curiosity. "Well, I can't really compare it to anything since I don't know what it's like to have parents in the first place," he explained. "But I do have Kyuki and Ayame. They're like my family, and I love them." Shiho nodded, understanding his attachment to the Ichiraku family. "So, I guess Kyuki-san is like a father to you then?" she asked. Naruto grinned. "Yeah, he's always been looking out for me and giving me advice. He sure as shit ain't scared to tell me when I've been out of line," he laughed. "He's put his foot up my plenty of times because of it." Shiho giggled at his words, remembering the times Ayame had scolded Naruto. "I've seen Ayame nearly take your head off with a ladle, so it's safe to say they're both good at keeping you in check," she teased. Naruto chuckled, his face still wearing a fond smile. "Yeah, Ayame is, well, she's, he trailed off, his face turning melancholic. Shiho raised an eyebrow, noticing the change in his behavior. "She's what?" she asked. Naruto cleared his throat. "She was the first person my age that wanted to be friends with me, and sometimes I don't think I really deserve her as all," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "That sounds really sad when I say it out loud, doesn't it, hee?" Shiho smiled at the blonde's openness, shaking her head. "It's not sad at all, Uzumaki-kun. It's good to have someone close like that," she assured, "and I'm sure she thinks of you that way too." She watched as his face went a little pink. Yeah. He mumbled, clearly not used to talking about these kinds of things. Shiho despite herself couldn't help but laugh a little at his discomfort. If she was told that she would witness this side of the blonde last month, then she would have been in disbelief, but seeing it now made her happy as it meant that they were becoming good enough friends. "Of course she does, I've only been at Ichiraku's a few times but I could tell that you two are close." She smiled at him. "It was nice seeing a different side of you, a less serious side that is." "Hey," Naruto turned to her confused. "What did you mean, serious side?" he asked. Shiho was thankful for the change in behavior, but she was more grateful for the timing as they both approached their splitting point. Shiho just smiled at Naruto once more, taking the left path and waving, "Good night, Uzumaki-kun." Naruto just shook his head. A part of him still felt weird at his openness just now, but also a sense of relief. He's had a few conversations like that with Ayame and Tyuki over the years, but actually talking about those two out loud to someone else made stomach churn. Thoughts and feelings he held about the father-daughter duo were solidified, but new ones arose in him, and it left him feeling unsure on how to go about them. Instead of focusing on them just now, he snapped back to reality only to realize that Shiho had left a while back and his body had moved on autopilot to the street where Ichiraku stood. From where he was, he could already see it at the end of the street. Unsurprisingly, the dinner rush had already begun as he saw a queue standing outside, the stools within the stand occupied as he spotted the legs of the patrons from under the awning. He could already picture Ayame's face behind the counter as she rushed around taking orders and preparing takeaway bags, her face flushed, but a kind smile never leaving her lips, despite her working herself to the bone. Time to brighten up Ayame's day, he thought to himself as he straightened his forehead protector. Approaching the awning of the ramen stand, he could see her deftly assembling a takeout order, just as he had imagined. Upon entering, their eyes locked, and Ayame's face lit up at the sight of him, but her gaze quickly shifted to his headband. "You did it!" she screamed, already running out to the front, her arms snatching him into a tight embrace. Was there ever any doubt? He laughed as the girl held onto his jacket. "What's going on, OU?" Tyuki's voice called from the back, only to pause when his eyes landed on the blonde. A grin, matching his own, spread across his face as he set aside his hand towel and joined the duo in their embrace. "Well done, Naruto, seriously," Tyuki spoke, "we never doubted you for a second." The hug lasted a few more seconds before Tyuki was the first to pull away, customers both inside and outside observing with varying expressions, only looking away when Tyuki glanced at them. "Let's get back to work," he said, patting the youngsters on their backs. "We can celebrate more later in private, you've earned it, Naruto." Ayame reluctantly let go of the embrace as she wiped at her eyes. "There's no need for the waterworks, Ayame," Naruto teased, laughing as he dodged a half-hearted swipe at his head from her. "I'm just happy for you, you jerk," she said, walking back behind the counter. "Now come help me serve customers, you can tell me about the exam while we work." "That's fine with me." With the grin still plastered on his face, he followed Ayame behind the counter, grabbing his apron. Dinner rush went by quickly with Naruto telling him and Ayame of his day and now that he's a ninja the things he's looking forward to, the places he might visit and the people he may meet. Tyuki would have reminded the boy of the dangers he would face, but he didn't want to dampen the mood, nor did he think that Naruto was stupid enough not to know. The boy had come a long way since he first met him. The once cheeky snot-nosed brat, that made sure to be a problem for someone who looked at him the wrong way, had not only grown into a mature young teen, but he had become more sure of himself and wise to the world around him. As sad and disheartening as it is, life isn't fair, and when Tyuki first gave the boy leftovers all those years ago he knew who the kid was, but he didn't care. While the thought of a demon being sealed the kid was terrifying, rightfully so, he didn't see the point in punishing the child for being the one who had to bear that burden. As sad and disheartening as it is, life isn't fair, and when Tyuki first laid eyes on the boy and gave him leftovers all those years ago he could tell that the boy was already coming to terms with that at his young age. He himself at the time knew who Naruto was, but he didn't care. While the thought of that gigantic, horrifying demon being sealed away inside the young boy did scare the life out of him, he didn't see the point in fearing the young curious child that was wandering the streets himself at times when others his age would be getting ready for bed. It just felt wrong to punish the one bearing the burden while not even knowing himself. It always nagged at him every time he thought about that night. The noise of gravel crunching as a little kid dragged his feet through it, his eyes taking in the buildings, their individual colors and cracks in each store's signs. Then when he saw those little curious innocent eyes land on him and change to an untrusty frown, he had two options that night. The option of looking away and pretending that he wasn't even there was the first option, the other was to acknowledge he was there, acknowledge that he existed in a village that was trying to pretend he wasn't. The first option sounded easy, too easy, so he gave the child a big grin and offered him a warm bowl of ramen, eventually sending him away with a takeout bag full of leftovers. It was a welcome surprise when the boy arrived back the next night, his hand clenching a wad of ryo and his stomach empty and growling for more ramen. As he poured his last 3 bowls of tonight, he couldn't help but smile at the memory and compare it to the 2 sitting out front. Pouring the final ladle of broth into one of the bowls, he carried the 3 bowls with ease into the front and placed them down in front of the 2 teens. 1 chicken ramen for Ayame and 1 miso with extra char siu for Naruto, he said, grabbing himself a stool on his side and sitting down. Thanks, Dad, thanks, old man, they both replied, the 3 of them saying a brief thanks for the meal before they all dug in. The sounds for the next few minutes consisted of the loud slurps from the trio as they ate their meal, Chuki shaking his head fondly at Naruto being unable to resist wolfing the bowl down as he sat waiting for them both to finish as he sipped from a glass of water. So, are set to go for tomorrow? Chuki asked, placing his chopsticks down. Yeah, I should be, Naruto replied. I doubt I'll be doing anything but meeting my team tomorrow anyways, but I have all my stuff ready back home. Make sure you triple check before you leave in the morning, you don't want to set a bad first impression on whoever your sensei will be, Chuki said. If they're anything like Funano sensei, then it won't matter how I show up, they'll have an issue about something, he remarked, resting his face on his hand. Well, if that happens, just make sure you give him the least amount of problems as you can. He advised, noticing his daughter had finished her meal. You don't want to start off your ninja career getting into bother by the higher-ups, do you? Of course I don't, but if they start shit I'll give them bother so they think twice about doing it again, he stated, causing Chuki's eyes to crinkle in amusement at his attitude, only for them to gaze over to Ayame. Usually when Naruto would curse she would reprimand the blonde, but her unusual silence was noticeable as he and Naruto spoke. Naruto's gaze also turned to Ayame, who had his headband in her hand, her finger trailing over the leaf engraving. You feeling okay, Ayame? He asked, turning his body. He was fully facing her. The girl in question had spent the past moment lost in contemplation about what tomorrow truly meant, not just for Naruto but for their little trio. Tomorrow marked Naruto's official ascent to ninjahood. The past 4 years she had watched him struggle and train just to become a protector of their village. With that, however, also came the time when he would have to depart from the village, as he would frequently have to undertake missions for the village. Over the years, as she served countless customers at the ramen stand, Ayame had always remembered the moments when shinobi patrons came by. Their stories of life outside the village often intrigued her, and some even bore the physical scars of their harrowing experiences as stark reminders. While her heart swelled with pride and joy for her best friend's success, a small, selfish part of her couldn't help but wish he hadn't passed the exam, or maybe, hadn't even enrolled in the ninja academy in the first place. If he hadn't taken this path, she mused, perhaps Naruto could have continued working alongside her and her father at the stand. They could have envisioned a future where they expanded their business, opening another ramen stand in the village and growing it together. However, as she traced the leaf engraving with her finger, she knew that Naruto had a different path to follow in life, one that would no doubt fill her with worry whenever he left the village for missions. The uncertainty of him not coming back made her stomach churn. Naruto, watching the emotions flicker across Ayame's face, placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. He knew her well enough to pick up on her unspoken worries. He reached out and gently covered his hand over his headband in her hand, snapping her out of her thoughts as she looked up at him and her father, both wearing looks of understanding on their faces. I guess we were gonna have this conversation sometime tonight, he smiled, looking back and forth between the father and daughter. I know you guys are worried, but I've been training for this for years. His hand gently pulled the headband out of her own. I promise I'll be careful out there and I'll come back with stories to tell you guys. Ayame looked up to Naruto, her hand wiping at the few tears threatening to spill. That would be nice, she said, her voice quivering ever so slightly. Just promise us one thing though, Naruto. Naruto nodded, his gaze unwavering. What's that? She gave him a heartfelt smile. Promise me that you'll come back to us, safe and sound, every time. Naruto knew that there was a chance he wouldn't come back every time. He knew they both knew that, but that wasn't the point here. His smile softened slightly, looking between them both once again, never being happier to have them both in his life at this moment. You got it, Ayame, he said, his blue eyes meeting her brown. I promise. Chapter 4. Anko made her way into the Hokage's office. Her fellow Jonin shuffled in alongside her, some looking just as groggy as she felt. Despite her decade as a shinobi, she never quite got used to the early morning missions, but when the Hokage summoned you, you came running. So, here she was, standing amongst her more awake peers, trying to shake off the last remnants of sleep. Anko stifled a yawn as she scanned the room, her eyes flicking over the familiar faces of her fellow shinobi. Some were awake and alert, eager to find out who was going to be their genin students. Few, however, looked like they could barely keep their eyes open. She watched on as Namiyashi Reito nudged Sarutobi Asuma in the ribs, rousing him from his sleepy state. As soon as the Hokage entered the room, the murmuring among the assembled shinobi came to a hushed silence. Anko quickly wiped the crust from her eye and straightened her posture, mentally preparing herself for what was to come. She knew that the Hokage's words would likely be about the new genin teams, even though they hadn't been explicitly informed. Anko couldn't deny that the idea of being a Jonin sensei filled her with a sense of trepidation. During her years as a shinobi, she had been on many missions where she was the team leader and had to make sure that not only the mission was successful but that her teammates got back home safely. However, the thought of taking on a genin squad was completely different. Having to be responsible for a group of young and inexperienced ninja made her uneasy. She had only been included in the pool of sensei candidates this year due to the Hokage's insistence due to her recent mission of tracking down her traitorous sensei that had gone wrong, and the Hokage felt that it was time for her to focus her efforts on something else as he didn't want to lose one of his jonin. She had been given a choice: become a jonin sensei or take up a part-time role in one of the specialized branches within the village. While she was hesitant about the prospect of teaching, the idea of being stuck in the intelligence division didn't appeal to her either. Sure, it would be fun to annoy Ibiki every day, but the thought of being bogged down by paperwork in a subdivision wasn't exactly enticing. So, despite her reservations, Anko was determined to make the most of the opportunity. She knew that teaching was a significant role in the village and that as a jonin sensei, she could help mold the next generation of shinobi into skilled and competent ninja. With a deep breath, she turned her attention to the Hokage, ready to hear what he had to say. First of all, I want to thank all of you for being here, the Sandaime began, his voice ringing out clearly in the meeting room. Today's meeting is about the new generation of shinobi who have just graduated from the academy, and who you will be mentoring as they begin their journey as genin. He paused to light his pipe, taking a deep puff before continuing. As you know, we create teams based on the strengths and weaknesses of the individual students, and also on your own areas of expertise as teachers. The goal is to create a cohesive unit that can work together effectively in the field. The Sandaime's gaze swept around the room, taking in the assembled jonin. Each of you will be assigned a team, which you will lead until the genin are promoted to chunin. If you feel that any of your students are not ready to be part of a team, for whatever reason, you may choose to send them to the reserves to continue their training. He raised his eyebrows as Hitaki Kakashi strolled in, fashionably late as usual. Speaking of which, I see Kakashi has finally decided to grace us with his presence. The late intrusion caused Anko to raise her brow a little. A part of her felt sorry for the kids who were going to get Hitaki Kakashi as a sensei. The guy had just been recently discharged from Anbu, and if what she had heard was true, then the guy wasn't all there mentally. The Sandaime cleared his throat, returning his attention to the matter at hand. Now, when your name is called, please come forward and collect the files of your assigned team. You will have today to review their profiles and get a first impression of them, and then tomorrow you will collect them from the academy at 9 o'clock sharp. He consulted his list. So, without further ado, let's begin. Hyuga Hoito, you're up first. From there, Anko observed as the jonin in the room approached the front to collect their team files one by one until the scroll pile gradually diminished in size. As she scanned the room, Anko realized that she recognized only a handful of faces. Asuma had left, and Yamashiro Aoba had taken his place, engaged in a small conversation with Reito. In the corner, Kakashi was engrossed in a book, and Anko could not help but speculate that the Hokage was deliberately delaying his turn due to his tardiness. As Anko's eyes scanned the remaining scrolls on the Hokage's desk, she thought of the possibility of being left without a team. She watched as Kakashi, the last jonin in the room, picked up the final scroll before making his way out, leaving her alone with the Hokage. Confusion etched across her face. She couldn't help but wonder if she had been forgotten or if there was some mistake. The Hokage seemed to read her thoughts and chuckled, pulling out 2 scrolls from his drawer. Don't worry, Anko. I saved the best for last, he said, passing her one of the scrolls. Take a look and tell me what you think. Opening the scroll, Anko's eyes landed on the first name, Hayashi Shiho. She read the details about her abilities and skills, already making a mental note to work on her genjutsu or long-distance ninjutsu. As she scrolled down, she came across the name of her second student, Inuzuka Hana. The information about Hana's exceptional physical abilities and her Ninken triplets, Haro, Shiro, and Taro, piqued Anko's interest. She had sparred with Inuzuka's dogs before and knew they could be vicious in a fight. The information also told her that the Hokage was wanting her to create a reconnaissance team if she had an Inuzuka tracker on her team. But then, to her surprise, there was no third student listed. Anko raised an eyebrow and looked at the Hokage. Was there an odd number of graduates this year, Hokage-sama? She asked, thinking that she would need to wait for her third position to be filled if she kept them as a team. The Hokage responded by sliding her the second scroll from his drawer. Taking it, she opened it and realized why they were on a separate scroll. Written at the top of the paper was the name, Uzumaki Naruto. The reasoning behind the separate scroll became known immediately. Despite it being the worst-kept secret in the village, nobody actually knew anything about the kid other than what he was. She quickly scanned through Naruto's profile, noting his age and his solid academic abilities and physical skills. His taijutsu seemed to be the best thing for him. She didn't show any outward reaction on being given his file and the Hokage's decision for him to learn under her, but the Hokage didn't fail to notice that she was thinking hard about it. He was watching her carefully to see if she showed any distaste for the kid she assumed. She did know the kid was a bit of a troublemaker years ago, but besides that, she never really heard about him, and the only time she actually ever laid eyes on the boy was when the Uchiha were still policing the village and were chasing him around the village. In fact, the only thing that was clear on her face was confusion, and after a moment of silence she spoke up. I don't understand why you would give Uzumaki to me, Hokage-sama. Surely someone with more experience would be better off for the kid. The Hokage nodded, acknowledging her concerns. Your reservations do hold some credit, Anko. But I chose you for this because I believe you are of the very few in the village that would treat the boy indifferently and give him good guidance and support, he said. You know what he holds within him, and you know that people tend to distrust those they don't understand. His words made her unconsciously rub at her neck. Seeing her reaction, he continued, the main reason I chose you is that you will be able to relate to the boy, albeit a small amount, compared to others. You know what it is like for people to question where your loyalties lie and be judged by things out of your control. He frowned. A few have brought his loyalty to my attention, and while I wish I could shrug it off, it does hold some credence. Anko understood where he was coming from. When she awoke in that lab 6 years ago bearing the curse mark that her bastard sensei put on her, coming back to the village was a hard one. Her friends were glad that she was alive and safe, but others who only heard about her through rumors tended to give her some looks. A few times had it where she would be on a mission with other chunin and some openly questioned her loyalty, stating that they didn't trust her, and she understood that she probably would feel the same if anyone connected to Orochimaru was working alongside them. Her loyalties being questioned was what led her to focus all her effort on climbing the ranks, and when she achieved Jonin she put her name forth for tracking her bastard sensei down and wanting a hand in his death. She didn't know how the Uzumaki kid hadn't snapped yet, if she were honest, if the little things she had heard about him were true, but she figured that he just developed the same mindset as her and eventually stopped caring about what others thought and focused on himself. I have made many mistakes with the boy myself, the Hokage continued, breaking her from her thoughts. I haven't spoken with him in years, and while I wish I could say that we last spoke on good terms, we didn't. He had just left the orphanage and was confused that the villagers, people he hadn't ever met, were treating him as if he had the plague. He sighed, looking every bit his age. He wanted me to tell him the reason for him being ostracized, and I couldn't tell him the truth. He was too young and wasn't mature enough at the time, so he couldn't be trusted with it. We argued and he left this office and never looked back, and I can't blame him for it, he said, a sad smile on his face. Anko could feel a sense of sympathy for both the Hokage and Naruto. It was no secret that the villagers had always been wary of the boy because of the QB incident, and it did surprise her that he had managed to do as well as he had with the way he has been treated. I'm not questioning your decisions, Hokage-sama, but if he's graduated, why don't you tell him of his status now? She asked. Genuinely she thought it was a little messed up the boy not knowing anything about himself. I was considering telling him the truth once he became a genin, along with a few other things, but my student has asked to be the one to do it. I'm unsure of when Jiraiya will show face, but if the situation calls for it, you have my permission to tell him of what he is, understood? I understand, Hokage-sama, she said, and I'll do my best to guide him in the right direction. Everyone deserves a chance to prove themselves, and I'll make sure he knows that. The Hokage nodded. Well said, Anko, I can already see that my choice was a good one, he said, getting up from his seat in her following suit. Now, I'll let you go now, and if you ever have any more questions, please feel free to drop by. Thank you, sir, Anko said, bowing her head in gratitude as the Hokage opened the door for her. She exited with the scrolls in her hands, one feeling significantly heavier than the other. As she descended the stairs, she felt a heavy responsibility settle on her shoulders. Her role as a sensei was now definitely harder than she would have ever thought, but she was never one to shy away from a challenge, and having Uzumaki as a student was one she definitely wouldn't back down from. With a determined look on her face, she made her way out of the Hokage Tower and took to the roofs, making her way back home. She had her students' futures to plan, and she would make sure that they would be as strong as they could be. The classroom was bustling with activity as everyone who had graduated sat chatting with one another. Today was when they would be assigned a team, and after years of training, they would finally get to experience the reality of shinobi life. Sitting alone, however, Hana sat impatiently, her foot tapping with excitement as she waited for Funano-sensei to arrive. She had been looking forward to this day for months, eagerly anticipating the moment she would finally be able to become a ninja and carry out missions with her squad. She stroked her dog's fur absent-mindedly, feeling their calming presence beside her. The door to the classroom opened and their sensei walked in. Behind them she spotted a cluster of jonin waiting to take their teams. Funano-sensei walked to the center of the class and allowed his eyes to take in his pupils once more, smiling. Before you meet your Jonin sensei, I want to just say that it has been an honor to be your sensei for the past 4 years, and I hope that everything you have learned here will serve you well out in the field. So, once again, he bowed. Thank you all for the past 4 years. Some of the class stood and replicated the gesture while others chose to stay seated. Now, let's get you introduced to your sensei, shall we? Funano-sensei made his way to the door and slid it open, only to be pushed aside by a woman with purple hair tied into a spiky ponytail. She wore a beige trench coat, covering her mesh bodysuit, a brown skirt, and metal shin bracers over her sandals. Finally, she exclaimed, flashing a toothy grin. Hayashi Shiho, Inuzuka Hana, and Uzumaki Naruto, I'm Mitarashi Anko, but you can call me Anko-sensei. She gestured for them to follow her. Follow me. Hana watched as the woman led them out of the classroom, with Naruto following closely behind. She rubbed shoulders with Shiho as she made her way out, her ninkin trotting behind her. Anko-sensei didn't even give them a moment to adjust, and as soon as they left the building Naruto started jogging to keep up with her, causing her and Shiho to do the same. Follow me, turned out to mean, keep up, as Anko-sensei took the trio and the dogs around the academy for 4 laps. Then they watched as she took to the roof of a nearby building. Laughing over her shoulder, they pursued on foot, her ninkin taking the lead. Hana's breath came in sharp pants as she ran through the crowded streets and alleyways of Konoha, following the lead of her ninkin. Come on, they have her scent, she called to her new teammates, hearing their footsteps pounding behind her. The dogs were fast, weaving through the throngs of people and vendors' carts, and the occasional shout was usually met with an apology from Shiho. The wild sensei chase continued for a half hour, with Anko leading them on a winding path that sometimes led to dead-end streets or alleys with mocking messages scrawled on notes. Frustration grew with every false lead, and Hana could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. As an Inuzuka, her pride was on the line, and she couldn't let her new teammates see her fail at the one thing her clan was famous for. She urged the dogs to keep going, hoping that they would soon catch up to their new elusive sensei. The newly minted genin upped their speed as the dogs did. The non-Inuzukas noticed Hana's frustration, Naruto thinking it was due to having to play a game of hide-and-seek when they had just graduated, whereas Shiho knew full well the reason of her frustration. Not being able to rise to the occasion when needed would be detrimental if they were out in the field, but they had just graduated and Shiho knew that this was the official start of their ninja career. Everything before now was just making sure they were responsible enough to be considered for fieldwork. It's okay, Inuzuka-san, I'm sure we'll find her soon. Shiho smiled, turning so the Inuzuka could see her as they ran. The tension in the girl's shoulders dropped, but she still held a frown on her face. I hope so, she said, blowing a bang out her face. Either way, I'm upping their training after today. The chase went on for a further 30 minutes, with the dogs leading them away from the streets to a large overgrown forest. The only thing preventing people from entering was the high barbed chain link fence. It must have only been a deterrent to civilians since Anko was standing atop the fence without a care in the world. About time you got here, she yelled. Good job on passing the first test. Now let's see how well you can track someone with the threat of being attacked. Hana watched as Anko flipped backwards and walked deeper into the forest, seemingly unconcerned with how they were going to get over the high fence. Hana looked around at her teammates, and they all wore expressions of confusion and frustration. Their sensei clearly had a technique that allowed her to jump higher than normal. They didn't, so it looked like they were having to do it the old-fashioned way. So, how are we going to play this out? Hana asked, starting their first conversation as a team, despite the chase they had just done. Shiho spoke up, cutting the fence isn't a good idea. It's there so people can't just walk in and get lost, but it's probably there to stop things getting out as well. Naruto nodded, chiming in, we can easily climb over the fence, but the dogs won't be able to follow us. So, we'll have to track Anko-sensei ourselves. Approaching the fence, Hana and Naruto kicked it in frustration. Naruto then looked at Hana and Shiho, his face filled with defeat as he took off his orange jacket. Hana failed to hide her smile, knowing what he was about to do. We better start climbing, he said, biting down on his jacket as he started to climb the fence. Reaching the top, he swung his jacket over the barbed wire and gently coaxed himself over to the other side, the barbs biting his jacket. Shiho went next and landed safely, but Hana surprised them both when she climbed halfway up and whistled. Her teammates watched on as her dogs pounced from their position, landing on her shoulders, and used her as a springboard to get over the top. Well, that's convenient, Shiho smiled. I forgot that ninkin were capable of such abilities. Naruto just shook his head as Taro approached him, licking his hand with a bark. Show off, he muttered, but the pat he gave the dog contrasted his words. Hana landed with a grunt and looked around, noticing both Naruto and Shiho had pulled out kunai, while her dogs were waiting in front of her, eagerly awaiting her command. Motioning to them to move out, Hana took up position behind the dogs, with Naruto and Shiho flanking her on either side. They had a sensei to find. As they continued deeper into the forest, Naruto remained vigilant, scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. The high fence and strange noises only heightened his sense of caution. The dogs were leading the way, their noses sniffing the ground for any scent to help track down the missing animal. The forest was dense and humid, a stark contrast to the cool breeze of the academy grounds. Naruto's mesh shirt stuck to his skin, but he didn't let it distract him from his task. He had to focus on finding the animal and getting it back safely to the academy. As they moved further into the forest, the sounds of wildlife surrounded them. Birds chirped and monkeys screeched in the distance. The occasional rustling of bushes caused Shiho to grip her kunai tighter. He knew that the forest was home to many dangerous creatures, and he was prepared for any encounter. As if testing them in the moment, a hissing noise came from the tree behind them. They all tensed and turned around to face the noise, their eyes widening in shock when they came face to face with a giant snake. Its body wrapped around the giant tree that it was nested in, its head moving side to side as it sized them up. The three dogs, now at the back of the group, growled at their new foe, but Hana quickly held out her fist, commanding them to stop. Naruto's senses were on high alert as he considered their options. They definitely weren't experienced enough to go toe-to-toe with this thing, and even if they could, it would be best for them to continue searching for their new sensei, wherever she may be. Deciding the roles of who should stay and who should go was easy. Hana had her dogs and Shiho and him were familiar enough with the way each other fought, so it was a no-brainer. With a subtle shift of his body, Naruto outlined his plan. Inuzuka, Naruto whispered urgently, when I say go, take your dogs and follow the trail. He slowly moved his empty hand to his side pack. Hayashi, we're gonna keep it busy and take the pressure off of her as she tracks our crazy sensei, got it? Why? Hana tried to refuse the idea, only to be cut off by Shiho. Got it, the quiet girl said, determination etched on her face. She turned slightly to give a small smile to Hana. Although Hana was slightly miffed about being left out, she understood that she was the only experienced tracker in their group. If she wasn't, then she would be shaming her family, and that wouldn't do one bit. Grinning, she got her feet ready and sent the dogs behind her a hand sign that got them ready for the fight to unfold. Go! The brighter blonde yelled, launching a kunai towards the snake's eye, and pulling forth a handful of shuriken to send after it. Shiho didn't waste time either as she formed a few bunchins to throw the snake off, whilst pulling 2 fistfuls of shuriken out, also launching them to its eyes. The snake struck out, rearing its head back first and aimed at Naruto, who narrowly dodged the first strike. Fuck, this thing's fast, Hayashi, Naruto said, now dual-wielding kunai as he sprinted towards the back side of the snake, hoping to get a slash or two into its skin. The snake looked towards the clones that Shiho had made. The creator of them saw the snake blinking and then looked straight at her. Forgetting the bunchin, it dashed her instead. Its tail whipping the fakes out of existence as it moved. Shiho gasped as she realized what had just happened, quickly dashing behind a tree, forming another clone to test and see if her theory was true. Leaving the clone to walk back out to where she just was, she ran towards where she saw Hana go to last, wanting to make sure they didn't get too separated. As she stepped out, she saw that her theory was right. The snake once again looked at them both before going straight for her. She thought, it can somehow see that I'm the real one, or it can smell it, still backing away, launching another shuriken at it to distract it. She heard Hana's voice not too far behind her commanding her dogs, but her eyes widened as she saw Naruto running up the snake's back and jump, trying to give the snake a solid blow to the head as the 2 kunai he held aimed for a downward strike. As she thought he was about to hit its skull, the snake moved its head to the left and quickly right, smacking the airborne Naruto, who went flying into a nearby tree. A yell fell over the area as he impacted against the solid bark. Uzumaki! Shiho yelled, running to him, only to stop. I'm fine, just keep going. True to his word, he was already advancing on its position. The snake must have not liked how little the attack affected the blonde as it targeted him once more, swinging its tail around for a swipe, causing Naruto to run up a tree as far as he could and springboard over the snake's appendage, the attack splintering the bark of the tree. Shiho was in a lucky spot as she witnessed a large splinter stick into the snake's tail. How could she be so stupid? Uzumaki, aim for the thing's ventral section, she shouted, throwing 2 kunai at the area herself. The what? He yelled, as he and Shiho were separated by the snake. The underbelly. Aim for its stomach. Shiho shouted again, dodging the snake's tail as it struck out at her. Naruto nodded, quickly analyzing the situation. He knew he had to act fast before the snake made another move. He charged forward, dodging the snake's fangs as they snapped at him. He was grateful for the distraction Shiho created in that moment as a shuriken she aimed at the snake's head hit under its eyelid, causing it to thrash its head, leaving its underbelly wide open. Dashing forwards, pulling a single explosive tag from his pouch, he wrapped it around the kunai's handle, stabbing it into the soft flesh of the snake. Take cover, Hayashi, he yelled, making a beeline towards her, forming the activation seal to activate his chakra-coated tag. The explosion that rang over the area echoed across the forest. The snake, despite its size, flew back into a tree, a foreign noise coming from its mouth as he and Shiho continued running. Naruto managed to catch up to Shiho, both of them taking cover behind a downed log, their eyes peeking over the trunk, noticing the large amount of smoke the tag set off. As the smoke cleared, Naruto and Shiho were surprised to find that the snake was nowhere to be seen. There was no blood or any sign of its demise in the area. They looked around cautiously, wondering where the creature had gone. Do you think we got it? Shiho asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. Naruto shook his head. No chance. It was too big for it to just disappear like that. The 2 of them stood up, ready for anything. As they cautiously looked around, they noticed that the ground around the explosion showed no sign of tracks. Where did it go? Naruto questioned out to the clearing. Shiho took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. We should keep our guard up and get back to Inuzuka-san. She must have found a solid lead by now. Naruto nodded in agreement, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of the snake. Suddenly, he heard a strange noise coming from the trees behind them. Both of them turned, side to side, prepared to attack but let out a sigh of relief as a familiar head of fur peeked out from a bush, barking at them in recognition, allowing itself to walk over to them both. The dog barked at them and tugged at Naruto's trouser leg, motioning for them to follow. Naruto and Shiho exchanged a quick glance before following the dog, their senses still on high alert from the fight. No snake that size disappears without a trace. The dog led them through the forest, darting through the trees and past the bushes with ease. It took them around 10 minutes to reach Hana, who was crouched behind a rock, motioning them to be quiet as they approached. As they got closer to her, adopting the same position as her, she managed to get a good look at their clothes and expressions. "What happened back there?" Hana questioned as they regrouped. "The snake disappeared on us," Shiho explained, while Naruto still kept his eyes on the area they had come from. Uzumaki-kun primed an explosive kunai to its soft spot, and once the smoke cleared, it was as if it just disappeared, no track marks or anything. Hana frowned at the situation. "You sure you never just blew it back with the explosion?" she asked. Naruto shook his head. "Nah, I've used those tags once before and it never caused that big of an explosion," he said, trying to recall the area where he had tested the effects of the tags before. "I might have set up the tag wrong when I did it myself, or the tag I just used was faulty in a bad way. I don't know what to think. At least you made it back to us, I guess," Hana said, motioning for them to look over the rock. "The good news is I found her, she's right across from us on the top branch." "You see her?" Shiho looked across the open area in front of them. With no trees or bushes in sight, the sun blazed down upon the open expanse, casting a warm and inviting glow across the ground. Here and there, scattered rocks dotted the flat landscape, providing minimal cover from the elements. "I see her, she looks bored," Shiho whispered, observing the woman lying flat on her back with her feet dangling from the sides of the branch. "What should we do now?" "Well, I don't want to track her down again. She's crafty and the triplets are getting tired," Hana commented. "I don't think any of us are getting that high up," Shiho responded, turning to Naruto for his input, only to see him still watching their backs. "You okay, Uzumaki-kun?" Yeah, I'm good," he said, turning to look at their sensei's position. "The only way we're getting up there is if you have another dog trick up your sleeve," he said, getting a laugh from Hana. "Unfortunately, I don't. So we're gonna need to come up with an actual plan." Shiho thought for a moment before speaking up. "Why don't we just flank around the clearing and get underneath her instead, then we can just ask her what this is all about." Hana and Naruto looked at her and shrugged their shoulders. "It's better than nothing, I guess," Hana said. "I just hope she doesn't run again." The group moved and retreated back so that the trees and foliage covered them from afar and circled around, occasionally popping out to make sure she hadn't moved yet. It took them another 10 minutes to carefully navigate around, finally making it within throwing distance of the tree. Naruto stepped forward, deciding to be the voice for the team, and shouted up towards the woman above, still dangling from the branch. "Hey!" he yelled, cupping his hands over his mouth. "You wanna explain this shit?" "Uzumaki-kun, be polite," Shiho chastised, watching as the woman turned and began laughing down at them. "You finally made it, huh?" Anko said, applying chakra to her feet as she stood upside down on the branch, her smile growing at their reactions. "You took long enough, that's for sure. Any longer and I would've failed you guys." "What do you mean fail us? We passed the exam," Hana pointed out, finger tapping on the leaf protector around her arm. "Huh, those tests at the academy don't mean shit," the purple-haired woman said, cutting the flow of chakra to her feet and effortlessly flipping to the ground. "Those were to just weed those with some potential to have a chance at being placed in a genin team," she explained. "So, you're saying that those who failed were just scrapped off?" Naruto questioned. "Of course not, that would be a waste of time and resources on the village. They get sent to the reserves, do mandatory training and are glorified D-rankers, few make it to Chunin, and even less make Jonin," she said, "but you guys are the lucky ones." "I wouldn't say this is lucky," Hana said, pointing to their surroundings. "Huh, guess not," Anko laughed, smiling at their dismay, "but seriously, you guys passed the test." "Yes, there's a shit ton of things that you guys could improve on. The village chase for one," She whirled a kunai in her hand as she continued talking, props on clearing the fence, but then there was the snake summon you came across. You would have been better off fighting as a unit instead of splitting up. The mention of the snake summon made Naruto's eyes widen, whereas Shiho developed a look of interest that explained the issue. You two did a good job at fighting my snake, but I made sure it didn't go all out on you guys, she said, her hand rubbing her neck. I hope she made it back without too much of an injury. Hehe, their sensei's laugh wasn't too convincing. She turned to Hana as she continued, no slight against your tracking skills, they are good for your age, but they're still shit. Hana bristled at the wording but nodded nonetheless, making Anko laugh. Luckily you have me as a sensei, we're being melded for a tracking and reconnaissance team. Anko watched as they all had varied reactions on their faces. Unsurprisingly, Hana looked excited. The three dogs at her feet shared the feeling as their tails wagged along. It would give the Inuzuka the best chance to progress in her clan's speciality and become a strong tracker in the future. The blonde girl, Shiho, looked to be happy with the news. From reading her documents, Anko summarized that the girl would have enjoyed any team she was placed on if it taught her a useful skill. The kid would probably pick up tracking faster than most would with her smarts. Finally, she looked to the whiskered blonde who had his hands folded across his chest, nodding away at their team role, a thoughtful look across his face. Anko knew from the moment she was given him as a student that she would train him to be the outlier of the squad. He would be the one that would assist her in getting them out of shitty situations if it came to it. As of today, I'll be training each of you how to become a better shinobi. By the time I'm finished with you lot, you'll be some of the best at recon in the village. I'll make sure you each have your main roles though, she said, pointing at Hana. You've already shown your skill in tracking, so your role's obvious. You're gonna be the navigator, getting us from A to B using your own senses and your ninkin, and when we get into fights you're gonna be a close-range combatant if it comes to it. Her finger moved to Naruto. Whiskers here is gonna be the powerhouse. She didn't expect the slight flinch at her nickname. She kicked herself mentally at the mistake. I'll train you up so that if shit does go down, it's mine and your job to make sure that we get out of it safely. An over-specialized team is a dead one in my books, so having you trained as someone who could turn the tides of battle would help the team out greatly, she said. Naruto nodded to her reasoning. Finally, she pointed at the Shiho, a toothy grin across her face. Specs, you're gonna be the brains to level out the brawn on the squad. Naruto nudged the girl in the arm, whispering something to her, making her face go red. I'm gonna have you focus on your communication. Get a few languages under your belt and make sure you're familiar with foreign customs. There will be a point where you will need to go undercover. Also, you bet that you'll have your encryption and decryption skills up to the same level as me. The girl smiled, a determined look setting itself on her face. She looked the most excited out of the three. I think that's enough for today anyway, so here. Anko pulled out 3 forms from her jacket, handing them over. This makes it official. Sign that and get it back to me tomorrow before we go for a team photo, okay? She asked, receiving nods. They looked at the forms, smiles encapsulating their faces as they did so. Basic information confirming that they agreed to serve the country with their lives and all that stuff was at the top. Their team information was at the bottom, where each of them got to see their official name. Team 9. Squad Leader, Tokubetsu Jonin, Mitarashi Anko. Squad Members. Genin, Hayashi Shiho. Genin, Inuzuka Hana. Genin, Uzumaki Naruto. Anko chuckled at their reactions, the reality of their position finally setting in. Deciding to snap them out of it, she began walking away, calling out over her shoulder. Hey, if you don't want to get eaten by a bear, I suggest you move your asses and follow me. The scramble to put the document away and chase after her made her cackle as she broke out into a sprint back to where they came in. Let's just say once they got back to the fence, Naruto wasn't too happy with the new holes in his jacket. The laughter from his new team didn't make it any better. At least I can put my graduation present to use now, he thought as he flung the now old jacket over his shoulder, walking back to the village with his new team. That's it for this part. If you enjoyed the story, please like, share, and subscribe to Fox Fanfiction. Your support means a lot. Tell us in the comments, which bond do you want to see grow stronger next?